for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host today. Donald Trump was in Grand Rapids just earlier this week to talk about illegal immigration, as he calls it. He lied again. We'll tell you all about his lies. There was also some pushback on Trump's visit. We will tell you about that because none of the other media really delved into it. We also have to talk about the big earthquake in Taiwan. They got hit really bad. This was a 7.4 earthquake, the biggest one they've had in 25 years. Plus, we have so many other topics to discuss today. Before we get started, let's tell you about how you can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on X, the former Twitter, at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and KEPJ San Antonio, Texas. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. We are recording this show on Thursday, April 4th, 2024. I want to go ahead and get right to our top story here. This is Joey Capoletti, Jill Colvin, and Adriana Gomez-Lyson writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 2nd out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Donald Trump accused President Joe Biden of unleashing a bloodbath at the U.S.-Mexico border Tuesday, escalating his inflammatory rhetoric as he campaigned in two Midwestern swing states likely to be critical to the outcome of the 2024 election. Trump, who has accused migrants of poisoning the blood of the country and vowed to launch the largest domestic deportation operation in the nation's history if he wins the second term, said Biden was allowing a bloodbath that was destroying the country. In Michigan, he referred to people in the U.S. illegally who are suspected of committing crimes as animals, using dehumanizing language that those who study extremism have warned increases the risk of violence. Yeah, all you got to do is take a look at Nazi Germany. Trump, flanked by law enforcement officers in uniform before a line of flags, said, quote, "Under crooked Joe Biden, every state is now a border state. Every town is now a border town because Joe Biden has brought the carnage and chaos and killing from all over the world and dumped us straight into our backyards." End of quote. Really? No, that's not the case. This has been going on for 40 years, Donnie. While violent crime is down, let me repeat that. Violent crime is down. Trump and other Republicans have attacked Biden by seizing on several high-profile crimes alleged to have been committed by immigrants in the U.S. illegally as border crossings have hit record highs. Polls suggest Trump has an advantage over Biden on the issue as many prospective voters say they're concerned about the impact of the crossings. Trump continued to hammer the theme at a rally in Green Bay, Wisconsin Tuesday evening as the state was holding its presidential primaries. Trump accused rogue nations of, quote, pumping migrants across our wide-open border, end of quote, and, quote, sending prisoners, murderers, drug dealers, mental patients, terrorists, end of quote, though there is no evidence that any country is engaged in that kind of coordinated effort. He also claimed that migrants would cost the country trillions of dollars in public benefits and cause Social Security and Medicare to, quote, buckle and collapse, end of quote. Really? No, the reason the Social Security and Medicare would collapse is because of you conservative bastards. It's called Medicare disadvantage. It's called cutting Social Security, changing the age of retirement. That's all things that Republicans want to do. It's not what Democrats want to do. It's what Republicans want to do. Period. End of story. He said, quote, if you want to help Joe Biden wheel Granny off the cliff to fund government benefits for illegals, then vote for crooked Joe Biden. But when I am president, instead of throwing Granny overboard, I will send Joe Biden's illegal aliens back home. End of quote. You really... No, Trump's ready to screw Granny over big time in more ways than one. Sorry, is Donald Trump a rapist or a racist? Or is he both? Gotta say it. Just gotta say it. Biden's campaign said Trump is the one who threatens the programs. Brianna Johnson, the campaign's Wisconsin communications director, said, quote, Donald Trump is trying to hide his unpopular record with erratic lies and desperate denials, end of quote. And we'll get to some of those lies in just a minute here. The White House emphasized the positive impact that immigration has on the U.S. economy. They argued that recent gains in immigration have helped to boost employment and sustained growth as the Federal Reserve hiked interest rates to bring down inflation. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said at Tuesday's briefing, quote, we know immigrants strengthen our country and also strengthen our economy, end of quote. She noted that immigrants were the ones doing the critical work on the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore when it collapsed after being struck by a ship. Trump invoked the killing of Ruby Garcia, a Michigan woman who was found dead on the side of a Grand Rapids highway on March 22nd. Police say she was in a romantic relationship with the subject, Brandon Ortiz Vite. He told police he shot her multiple times during an argument before dropping her body on the side of the road and driving off in her red Mazda. Trump incorrectly referred to the 25-year-old Garcia as a 17-year-old. No, he did that on purpose. Authorities say Ortiz Vite is a citizen of Mexico and had previously been deported following a drunken driving arrest. He does not have an attorney listed in court records. Trump also again mentioned the killing of Laken Riley, a nursing student in Georgia. A Venezuelan man who officials say entered the U.S. illegally has been charged. Riley's family attended Trump's rally in Georgia last month and met with him backstage. Trump referred to the suspect in Riley's death as, quote, an illegal alien animal, end of quote. Trump said, quote, the Democrats say, please don't call them animals, they're humans. I said, no, they're not humans, they're animals, end of quote. Yeah, because Donald Trump, again, is a racist. A rapist racist. That sums it up beautifully, folks. FBI statistics show overall violent crime dropped again in the U.S. last year, continuing a downward trend after a pandemic-era spike. In Michigan, violent crime hit a 3-year low in 2022, according to the most recent available data. Crimes in Michigan's largest city, Detroit, is also down, with the fewest homicides last year since 1966. Michigan and Wisconsin are seen as critical battleground states in this year's election. Trump won both in 2016, toppling the Democrats' so-called blue wall, but lost them to Biden in 2020. His campaign is hoping to win them back with a particular focus on blue-collar workers and union members. Let me again remind all of you, Donald Trump is a scab. He doesn't believe in unions. He hates unions. He is a scab. In Green Bay, some supporters braved snowfall for 3 hours outside to enter the venue. In Grand Rapids, over 100 supporters stood in the cold rain to line the street where Trump's motorcade was expected to pass. At a nearby park, a small group advocating for immigration reform gathered to hold a moment of silence for Garcia while holding signs that read, "No human being is illegal and Michigan welcomes immigrants." Biden's campaign has tried to counter Trump's attacks by hammering Trump for his role in killing a bipartisan border deal that would have added more than 1,500 new Customs and Border Protection personnel in addition to other restrictions. Once again, the AP refers to Trump as former president. We do not do that on the show. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer said Monday, quote, there was a solution on the table. It was actually the former president that encouraged Republicans to walk away from getting it done. I don't have a lot of tolerance for political points when it comes to endanger our economy and to some extent our people, as we saw play out in Grand Rapids recently, end of quote. Trump has been leaning into inflammatory rhetoric about the surge of migrants at the southern border since he became his party's presumptive nominee. He has portrayed migrants as poisoning the blood of the country, questioned whether some should even be considered people, and claimed without evidence that countries have been emptying their prisons and mental asylums into the U.S. In Green Bay, Trump spoke beside an empty podium that read, anytime, anywhere, any place. Trump said it was meant for Biden, whose campaign is not committed to participating in debates. Well, I'll tell you what. Yeah, it's Trump that probably doesn't want to participate in debates because Trump would get his ass kicked by Biden, just like he did in 2020. And since we mentioned Ruby Garcia, let's get to our next story here. This is Ken Kolker writing for Wood Television. This is dated April 2nd out of Grand Rapids. The sister of murder victim Ruby Garcia said she and her family were home watching live in disbelief as Donald Trump told an audience in Grand Rapids that he had spoken with some of her family. Mavi Garcia told Target 8, quote, he did not speak with any of us, so it was kind of shocking seeing that he had said that he had spoke with us and misinforming people on live TV, end of quote. Mavi Garcia is Ruby Garcia's sister and the family spokesperson. She said neither Trump nor anybody from his campaign has contacted her or anybody in her immediate family. She said her family is close and she would know if that had happened. Mavi Garcia said, quote, it was shocking. I kind of stopped watching it. I'd only seen up to that after I heard a couple of misinformations, he said. I just stopped watching it, end of quote. Trump spent some of his speech on Tuesday focusing on immigration, turning to the March 22nd murder of 25-year-old Ruby Garcia. Court records show Brandon Ortiz Vite, who was in the U.S. illegally, has confessed to killing her and dumping her along U.S. 131 in Grand Rapids. While police say the two were boyfriend and girlfriend, Ruby Garcia's sister said the two were friends and that the relationship hadn't gotten that far. She said that she knew that Ortiz Vite was in the U.S. illegally but didn't know the details. Mavi Garcia said, quote, I wish he would have stayed in Mexico, end of quote. She spoke with the media days after the shooting, but the family asked for privacy after that, including on the day of the funeral. But she responded immediately to a text from Target 8 after Trump's speech in Grand Rapids on Tuesday. She says she's angry that Trump and others have turned her sister's death into something political. Quote, it's always been about illegal immigrants. Nobody really speaks out about when Americans do heinous crimes, and it's kind of shocking why he would just bring up illegals. What about Americans who do heinous crimes like that? The focus should be on my sister right now, who she was in life. I want people to remember who she was in life. She was a very happy person, a very generous person. She was always so happy, could light up a room. End of quote. Ortiz Vite is facing 5 charges, including felony murder and carjacking. He's expected back in Grand Rapids District Court on April 9th. And since we're talking about Trump being in Grand Rapids, let's go ahead and continue. This is Katie Rosendale, Rachel Van Gilder, Michael Ozust, and Megan Bunchman writing for Wood Television. This is also dated April 2nd out of Grand Rapids. As Donald Trump visited Grand Rapids to criticize President Joe Biden's immigration policies and blame them for an increase in crime, local immigration activists and Democrats derided his comments. Movimiento Cosecha, Grand Rapids, held a pro-immigrant rally at Rosa Parks Circle downtown, not far from DeVos Place Convention Center, where Trump held his event. A couple dozen people attended the rally, which started around 1 p.m. Organizers displayed a sign that said, End family separation, Michigan welcomes immigrants, permanent protection, dignity, and respect. Attendees carried signs that said things like no one is illegal and dignity for undocumented immigrants. In both English and Spanish, the speaker, Gemma, called for Michigan to issue driver's licenses regardless of immigration status, saying that is the organization's main effort right now. By the way, Gemma is actually our good friend Gemma Lowe. Of course, Wood TV will not totally identify her, but we will, because, again, we know who she is. The event included a moment of silence for Ruby Garcia. Lowe said, quote, "Thank you for remembering a young life that was taken from our community too quick," end of quote. Authorities say Garcia was killed by Brandon Ortiz Vite. The Kent County prosecutor said it was a case of domestic abuse that led to homicide. Ortiz Vite came to the U.S. illegally as a child and remained for years under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. Trump took credit for deporting Ortiz Vite in 2020 after his DACA status lapsed in 2019. Ortiz Vite later returned to the U.S. illegally, though it's unclear exactly when. Lowe condemned those who used Garcia's death to reinforce anti-immigrant sentiments. She said, quote, "The candidate, now ex-President Trump, comes to our city to enhance the anti-immigrant rhetoric and the hate to our community. It is a tragic event where a young life was lost, allegedly killed by an immigrant, does not represent our community. One incident in the thousands and millions of people of immigrants that come here to do the jobs that nobody else in this country is what we need to hear and represent our community," end of quote. She continued, quote, "As human beings, as people that we're here to contribute to this society, that we demand that people look at us as a human being, as a person that contributes with labor, with our consumption, with our taxes, with everything that the immigrant community represents," end of quote. Kent County Commissioner Ivan Diaz, a Democrat, was at the rally to support the immigrant community. Diaz said, quote, "Unfortunately, we have seen that many people in elected offices and those aspiring to political office are taking advantage of a tragedy here in the Grand Rapids area to advance their political interests," end of quote. After Lowe spoke, demonstrators marched through downtown Grand Rapids to the convention center, where they led pro-immigrant chants across the street from the Trump supporters. God, I wish Wood TV would start checking their articles. Then again, they don't check their chyron pretty much on a nightly basis and riddled with errors. Kathleen Kleinbriel of Metro Grand Rapids, who demonstrated with the pro-immigrant group, said, quote, "We're Christians, we're Catholic, we believe that everyone is equal in God's eyes. We're all from somewhere else. Our ancestors, unless we're Native American, and I'm not, our ancestors came from somewhere else. And we were immigrants at one point. Some of us were refugees, I assume, at one point. And at that time, the U.S. was open to having people come, and now they aren't so much. So we'd like to go back to the way it was," end of quote. On Tuesday morning, 3 Democratic lawmakers from Michigan held a news conference in which they characterized Trump as divisive. U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow said, quote, "Let me just start today really underscoring the fact that Ruby Garcia's death was a horrible tragedy. And so is every life taken by violence, including domestic violence, regardless of who commits the crime. But unfortunately, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans are hell-bent on exploiting Ruby's death for their own politics. Frankly, I think it's shameful," end of quote. State Senate Majority Leader Winnie Brinks of Grand Rapids said, quote, "As Trump goes, so go Michigan Republicans. From claiming a bus carrying Gonzaga men's basketball team was an invasion of immigrants to callously invoking Hiroshima and Nagasaki when talking about Gaza, to trying to make the death of Ruby Garcia about immigration and fear instead of domestic violence, Donald Trump is always about division instead of unity," end of quote. She also criticized Trump's stance on abortion and his policies that, quote, "created incentives to ship Michigan manufacturing jobs overseas," end of quote. U.S. Representative Haley Stevens of southeastern Michigan said, quote, "Donald Trump is coming to Grand Rapids to do what he does best. Divide, distract, and fearmonger instead of doing something to address real-life issues that matter to our country," end of quote. Stabenow blamed Trump for the failure of a bipartisan border security proposal in February. She said, quote, "Senate Democrats and Republicans worked together for months to negotiate a tougher border security bill, the first bipartisan bill in 20 years, and we had the votes to pass it, right up until the last minute. Then Trump decided he didn't want us to pass it because he thinks chaos at the border will help his campaign. So he got the MAGA Republicans to kill the bill," end of quote. And that's just exactly what happened. Right now, let's go to our next story talking about Donald Trump. This is Kate Plummer writing for Newsweek. This is dated April 3rd. Donald Trump suffered a blow in a number of primary votes on Tuesday after thousands of Republicans refused to vote for him. Trump is the presumptive Republican nominee in the 2024 presidential elections, having last month won enough delegates to secure the nomination and because all of his rivals have dropped out of the race. That, however, has not quelled dissent among some moderate Republicans and supporters of his rivals like Nikki Haley, who dropped out of the race last month, who have indicated they would never vote for Trump. With that in mind, although Trump comfortably won 4 primary votes on Tuesday, in Wisconsin, Connecticut, New York, and Rhode Island, it is significant that in all those states, a proportion of Republicans voted for politicians no longer in the race, showing anti-Trump feeling across the GOP is alive and well. This dissent could prove difficult in swing states when the Republican faces Democratic candidate Joe Biden in the November election. In Wisconsin, Trump won 78.9% of the vote share, while Haley, the former South Carolina governor, garnered 12.8% of the vote. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis 3.3% of the vote. That is according to NBC News. In Connecticut, Trump won 77.8% of the vote. 14% went to Haley. 4.8% said they were uncommitted. Trump also lost some 20% of the vote in New York, where he gained 82.1% of ballots to Haley's 12.9%. In Rhode Island, he won 83.7% of the vote. 10.6% of voters opted for Haley instead. Newsweek contacted a representative for Trump by email to comment on this story. Tuesday's results follow Trump being similarly stung in Florida last month. Trump won 81.2% of the votes in the state primary, down from 2020 when he won about 94% of the state vote. Scott Lucas, a professor in international politics at the University College Dublin, previously told Newsweek the Republican Party is very divided and Haley and her supporters may not switch their allegiance to Trump. He said, quote, Nikki Haley stayed in the race not because she thought she could win it, but she stayed in it for Super Tuesday because a lot of people behind her, a lot of Republican members, a lot of Republican donors are very unsettled about Donald Trump. They're very unsettled about his legal problems. They're very unsettled because he's unpredictable. They're very unsettled because of the damage that he can cause on domestic issues and on foreign policy. End of quote. The Republican National Convention, where Trump will be confirmed as the 2024 nominee, will take place in Milwaukee in July. Speaking of Trump's legal problems, let's go ahead and get to our next story here. This is Eric Tucker, writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 3rd out of Washington. Federal prosecutors chided the judge presiding over Donald Trump's classified documents case in Florida, warning her of potential jury instructions that they said rest on a fundamentally flawed legal premise. In an unusual order, U.S. District Judge Aileen Cannon had asked prosecutors and defense lawyers to formulate proposed jury instructions for most of the charges, even though it remains unclear when the case might reach trial. She asked the lawyers to respond to 2 different scenarios in which she appeared to accept the Republicans' argument that he was entitled under a statute known as the Presidential Records Act to retain the sensitive documents he is now charged with possessing. The order surprised legal experts and alarmed special counsel Jack Smith's team, which said in a filing late Tuesday that the 1978 law, which requires presidents to return presidential records to the government upon leaving office, but permits them to retain purely personal ones, have no relevance in a case concerning highly classified documents like the ones Trump is alleged to have stored at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Palm Beach, Florida. Prosecutors said those records were clearly not personal and there is no evidence Trump ever designated them as such. They said that the suggestion that he did so was invented only after it became public that he had taken with him to Mar-a-Lago after his presidency boxes of records from the White House and that none of the witnesses they interviewed in the investigation support his argument. Prosecutors wrote, quote, not a single one has heard Trump say that he was designating records as personal or that at the time he caused the transfer of boxes to Mar-a-Lago, he believed that his removal of records amounted to the designating them as personal under the PRA. To the contrary, every witness who was asked this question had never heard such a thing. End of quote. Smith's team said that if the judge insists on citing the presidential records law in her jury instructions, she should let the lawyers know as soon as possible so that prosecutors can appeal. The filing reflects continued exasperation by prosecutors at Cannon's handling of the case. The Trump-appointed judge has yet to rule on multiple defense motions to dismiss the indictment, as well as other disagreements between the two sides, and the trial date remains unsettled. suggesting that a criminal case the Smiths team has said features overwhelming evidence could remain unresolved by the time of the November presidential election. Cannon, who earlier faced blistering criticism over her decision to grant Trump's request for an independent arbiter to review documents obtained during an FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, heard arguments last month on two of Trump's motions to dismiss the case, including that the Presidential Records Act permitted him to designate the documents as personal and that he was therefore permitted to retain them. The judge appeared skeptical of that position but did not immediately rule. Days later, she asked the two sides to craft jury instructions that responded to the following premise. A president has sole authority under the PRA to categorize records as personal or presidential during his or her presidency. Neither a court nor a jury is permitted to make or review such a categorization decision. An outgoing president's decision to exclude personal records from those returned to the government, she continued, quote, constitutes a president's categorization of those records as personal under the PRA, end of quote. Then prosecutors said that interpretation of the law is wrong. They also urged Cannon to move quickly in rejecting the defense motion to dismiss. They said, quote, the PRA's distinction between presidential and personal records has no bearing on whether a former president's possession of documents containing national defense information is authorized under the Espionage Act, and the PRA should play no role in the jury instructions on the elements of Section 793, end of quote. Section 793 is the statute that makes it a crime to illegally retain national defense information. Prosecutors added, quote, indeed, based on the current record, the PRA should not play any role at trial at all, end of quote. Trump, Republicans' presumptive nominee for 2024, is facing dozens of felony counts related to the mishandling of classified documents, according to an indictment alleging he improperly shared a Pentagon plan of attack and a classified map related to a military operation. The Florida case is among 4 criminal cases against Trump, who has insisted he did nothing wrong in any of them. In a separate Trump team filing, defense lawyers renewed their demand that Cannon dismiss the indictment. Yeah, because Cannon is a Trump lackey. That's all it is. She needs to be removed from this case, period. She really does. She doesn't have a clue about what she's doing. All right, let's get to some international news. This is Christopher Bodine, Johnson Lay, and Samina Mistrianu writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 3rd out of Hualien, Taiwan. The strongest earthquake in a quarter-century rocked Taiwan during the morning rush hour Wednesday, killing 9 people, stranding dozens of workers at quarries, and sending some residents scrambling out of the windows of damaged buildings. The quake, which also injured more than 1,000, was centered off the coast of rural mountainous Hualien County, where some buildings leaned at severe angles, their ground floors crushed. Just over 93 miles away in the capital of Taipei, tiles fell from older buildings and schools evacuated students to sports fields as aftershocks rattled the island nation. Rescuers fanned out in Hualien looking for people who may be trapped and using excavators to stabilize damaged buildings. The numbers of people missing, trapped, or stranded fluctuated as authorities learned of more in trouble and worked to locate or free them. Some 70 workers who were stranded at 2 rock quarries were safe, according to Taiwan's National Fire Agency, but the roads to reach them were damaged by falling rocks. 6 workers were going to be airlifted on Tuesday. In the early hours after the quake, neighbors and rescue workers could be seen on TV lifting residents, including a toddler, through windows and onto the street after doors fused shut in the shaking. Taiwan is regularly jolted by quakes, and its population is among the best prepared for them. But authorities expected a relatively mild earthquake and did not send out alerts. The eventual quake was strong enough to scare even people who are used to such shaking. One resident who lives in a 5th-floor apartment in Taipei said, quote, I've grown accustomed to them, but today was the first time I was scared to tears by an earthquake. I was awakened by the earthquake. I had never felt such intense shaking before, end of quote. At least 9 people died in the quake, which struck just before 8 a.m., according to the fire agency. The local United Daily News reported that 3 were hikers killed in rock slides in Taroko National Park, which is in Hualien, and that a van driver died in the same area when boulders hit the vehicle. The tsunami warning was triggered but later lifted. Over 1,000 people were reported injured. Authorities initially lost contact with 50 hotel employees and minibuses in the national park after the quake downed phone networks. 3 employees walked to the hotel while the others remained stranded. The quake and aftershocks caused 24 landslides and damaged roads, bridges, and tunnels. The national legislature, a converted school built before World War II, and sections of the main airport in Taiwan, just south of Taipei, also saw minor damage. Hualien Mayor Su Chen-wei said 48 residential buildings were damaged in the city, which shares the name with the county. Su said water and electricity supplies were in the process of being restored. Taiwan's earthquake monitoring agency said the quake was 7.2 in magnitude, while the U.S. Geological Survey put it at 7.4. It struck about 11 miles off Hualien on Taiwan's east coast and was about 21 miles deep. Multiple aftershocks followed. Traffic along the east coast was at a virtual standstill after the earthquake, with landslides and falling debris hitting tunnels and highways. Train service was suspended across the island of 23 million people, with some tracks twisted by the stress of the quake, as was subway service in Taipei, where sections of a newly constructed elevated line split apart but did not collapse. The initial panic after the earthquake quickly faded on the island, which prepares for such events with drills at schools and notices issued via public media and mobile phone. Stephen Gao, a seismologist and professor at Missouri University of Science and Technology, said Taiwan's readiness is among the most advanced in the world and includes strict building codes and a world-class seismological network. By noon, the metro station in the busy northern Taipei suburb of Baitu was again buzzing with people commuting to jobs and people arriving to visit the hot springs or travel the mountain paths at the base of an extinct volcano. The earthquake was felt in Shanghai and several provinces along China's southeastern coast, according to Chinese media. China and Taiwan are about 100 miles apart. The Japan Meteorological Agency said a tsunami of about 1 foot was detected on the coast of Yonaguni Island about 15 minutes after the quake struck. Smaller waves were measured in Ishigaki and Miyako Islands. All alerts in the region had been lifted by Wednesday afternoon. Taiwan lies along the Pacific Ring of Fire, the line of seismic faults encircling the Pacific Ocean where most of the world's earthquakes occur. Hualien was last struck by a deadly earthquake in 2018 that killed 17 people and brought down a historic hotel. Taiwan's worst quake in recent years struck on September 21, 1999, with a magnitude of 7.7, causing 2,400 deaths, injuring around 100,000, and destroying thousands of buildings. The economic fallout from the quake has yet to be calculated. Taiwan is the leading manufacturer of the world's most sophisticated computer chips and other high-technology items that are highly sensitive to seismic events. Parts of the electricity grid were shut down, possibly leading to disruptions in the supply chain and financial losses. Taiwanese chipmaker TSMC, which supplies semiconductors to companies such as Apple, said it evacuated employees from some of its factories in Hsinchu, southwest of Taipei. Hsinchu authorities said water and electricity supplies for all the factories in the city's science park were functioning as normal. The Taiwan Stock Exchange opened as usual on Wednesday, with the index wavering between losses and gains. So there's the latest about the Taiwan earthquake. Wow, 7.4. That's pretty sizable. And I'm surprised. And kudos to Taipei and Taiwan for strengthening building codes so that buildings are now resistant to earthquakes. That's something we need to do in this country, but we don't spend money on infrastructure. At least we haven't until Biden. In the state of Michigan, we haven't until Gretchen Whitmer. Hey, Gretchen did say she was going to fix the damn roads, and that's what she's doing. Much to the chagrin of some people. Right now, let's go ahead to our next story. This is Darlene Sepperville writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 3 out of Washington. President Joe Biden teamed up with Senator Bernie Sanders on Wednesday to promote his administration's efforts to lower the cost of inhalers and other health care needs as the White House continues its effort to highlight Biden's legislative achievements to voters ahead of the November elections. During the event at the Indian Treaty Room at the White House, Biden said to Sanders, quote, "Bernie, you and I have been fighting this for 25 years. Finally, we beat Big Pharma. Finally," end of quote. Both men touted the lower health care costs that come through the Democrats' sweeping climate, health care, and tax package that Biden signed into law in 2022. It caps various health care costs for those on Medicare, including $35 a month for insulin and $2,000 a year for prescription drugs. No Republican lawmakers voted for the law. His aides and Democratic officials say Biden's achievements such as lowering health care costs are popular with the public, yet the incumbent president hasn't yet gotten the credit from voters. And both Biden and Sanders promoted their efforts to pressure major inhaler manufacturers to cap the cost of the devices to no more than $35 a month. Otherwise, the purchase price of inhalers ranges somewhere between $200 to $600 without insurance, according to the White House. Sanders said, quote, "I want to thank President Biden for what he has done on this issue up to now, and I look forward to working with the president as we go forward," end of quote. Sanders, a Vermont independent, and Biden were rivals for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2020. After Sanders ended his bid, his aides worked with Biden's campaign officials to craft a party policy platform that would reflect Sanders' influence. If it really reflected Sanders' influence, we would have single-payer universal health care by now. But that's never going to happen, not under the Democrats or the Republicans, because they're beholden to the insurance companies and to Big Pharma. That's all it is. They're basically beholden to big health. That should be a new phrase, big health, because that really wraps up everything under one nice little package. All right, let's go ahead to our next story. This is Wafa Sharafa and Sami Magdi writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 3rd out of Deir al-Bala, Gaza Strip. Some of Israel's closest allies, including the United States on Tuesday, condemned the deaths of 7 aid workers who were killed by airstrikes in Gaza, a loss that prompted multiple charities to suspend food deliveries to Palestinians on the brink of starvation. The deaths of the World Central Kitchen workers threatened to set back efforts by the U.S. and other countries to open a maritime corridor for aid from Cyprus to help ease the desperate conditions in northern Gaza. President Joe Biden issued an unusually blunt criticism of Israel by its closest ally, suggesting that the incident demonstrated that Israel was not doing enough to protect civilians. Well, this was actually done on purpose, and I'll tell you why in a little bit here. Biden said, quote, "Israel has not done enough to protect aid workers trying to deliver desperately needed help to civilians," end of quote. He added that he was outraged and heartbroken by their killings, adding, quote, "Incidents like yesterday simply should not happen. The United States has repeatedly urged Israel to deconflict their military operations against Hamas with humanitarian operations in order to avoid civilian casualties," end of quote. Ships still laden with some 240 tons of aid from the charitable group turned back from Gaza just a day after arriving, according to Cyprus. Other humanitarian aid organizations also suspended operations in Gaza, saying it was too dangerous to offer help. Israel has allowed only a trickle of food and supplies into Gaza's devastated north, where experts say famine is imminent. Yeah, it's because Israel wants to commit genocide on Palestinians. Isn't it funny? The victims of genocide back in the 40s are now the perpetrators of genocide in the 2020s. Unbelievable. The dead from Monday night strikes included 3 British citizens, Polish and Australian nationals, a Canadian-American dual national, and a Palestinian. Those countries have been key backers of Israel's nearly 6-month offensive in Gaza, and several of them denounced the killings. Israel already faces growing isolation as international criticism of the Gaza assault has mounted. On the same day as the deadly airstrikes, Israel stirred more fears by apparently striking Iran's consulate in Damascus and killing 2 Iranian generals. The government also moved to shut down a foreign media outlet, Qatari-owned Al Jazeera Television. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The hit on the charity's convoy also highlighted what critics have called Israel's indiscriminate bombing and lack of regard for civilian casualties in Gaza. Israel's military chief, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, announced the results of a preliminary investigation early Wednesday. He said, quote, "It was a mistake that followed a misidentification at night during a war in very complex conditions." It shouldn't have happened, end of quote. But I'll agree with him there. It never should have happened. He gave no further details. He said an independent body would conduct a thorough investigation that would be completed in the coming days. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had earlier acknowledged the unintended strike on innocent people and said officials would work to ensure it does not happen again. Really? I don't believe him. I just don't. This was done on purpose to stop aid coming in to Palestinians. Period. End of story. World Central Kitchen said it had coordinated with the Israeli military over the movement of its cars. 3 vehicles moving at large distances apart were hit in succession. They were left incinerated and mangled, indicating multiple targeted strikes. At least one of the vehicles had the charity's logo printed across its roof to make it identifiable from the air, and the ordnance punched a large hole through the roof. Footage showed the bodies at a hospital in the central Gaza town of Deir al-Balah, several of them wearing protective gear with the charity's logo. Israeli TV said the initial military investigation found that the army identified the cars carrying World Central Kitchen's workers arriving at its warehouse in Deir al-Balah and observed suspected militants nearby. Half an hour later, the vehicles were struck by the Air Force as they headed south. The report said it was not clear who ordered the strikes or why. Throughout the war, Israel has said it seeks to avoid civilian casualties and uses sophisticated intelligence to target Hamas and other militants. No, they don't. They don't care about civilian casualties. They want genocide. Israeli authorities blame them for civilian deaths because they operate in populated areas. At the same time, Israel has also insisted that no target is off limits. Israeli forces have repeatedly struck ambulances and vehicles carrying aid, as well as relief organization offices and UN shelters, claiming that armed fighters were in them. Israeli forces have also shown a readiness to inflict widespread destruction on suspicion of a militant presence or out of tactical need. Homes with Palestinian families sheltering inside are leveled by strikes almost daily with no explanation of the intended target. Video of strikes released by the military often show them hitting individuals without visible weapons while identifying them as militants. More than 30, because genocide. They're committing genocide. And the world is too goddamn stupid to see it or to call it out. They're afraid. They're scared. Oh, we don't want to offend our allies. No, you need to. More than 32,900 Palestinians have been killed in the war, around 2/3 of them women and children, according to Gaza's health ministry, which does not distinguish between civilians and combatants in its count. Celebrity chef Jose Andres, who founded the World Central Kitchen charity, said he was heartbroken by the death of the staffers. He wrote on X, formerly Twitter, quote, "The Israeli government needs to stop this indiscriminate killing. It needs to stop restricting humanitarian aid, stop killing civilians and aid workers, and stop using food as a weapon." End of quote. Yeah, he's got that right. The U.S., Britain, Poland, Australia, and Canada all called on Israel to give answers on the deaths. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant launched an investigation and ordered the opening of a joint situation room enabling coordination between the military and aid groups. But anger among its allies could put new pressure on Israel. The British government summoned Israel's ambassador for a rebuke and called for an immediate humanitarian pause to allow more aid in and the release of hostages. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak told Netanyahu that he was appalled by the workers' deaths and described the situation in Gaza as increasingly intolerable. A senior Canadian government official said there will be a joint formal diplomatic rebuke at the foreign ministry in Israel on Wednesday. The official also said a top official with Canada's Global Affairs Department made a formal representation to Israel's ambassador to Canada on Tuesday. The official spoke on condition of anonymity as they were not authorized to speak publicly on the matter. The deaths sent a further chill through UN agencies and other aid groups that have said for months that sending truck convoys around Gaza, particularly in the north, has been extremely difficult because of the military's failure to either grant permission or ensure safe passage. Israel has barred UNRWA, the main UN agency in Gaza, from making deliveries to the north. The U.S. and other countries have been working to set up the sea passage from Cyprus to get around the difficulties. World Central Kitchen was key to the new route. It and the United Arab Emirates sent a pilot shipment last month. Their second delivery of around 400 tons of food and supplies arrived in 3 ships to Gaza hours before the strikes on the convoy. Around 100 tons were unloaded before the charity suspended operations, and the rest was taken back to Cyprus, according to Cypriot Foreign Ministry spokesperson Theodoros Gotsis. Still, Cypriot President Nikos Christodoulidis said Tuesday that ship deliveries would continue. ANERA, a Washington-based aid group that has been operating in the Palestinian territories for decades, said that in the wake of the strikes it was taking the unprecedented step of pausing its own operations in Gaza, where it had been helping to provide around 150,000 meals daily. In a statement, they said, quote, "The escalating risk associated with aid delivery leave us with no choice," end of quote. Jamie McGoldrick, the United Nations humanitarian coordinator for the Palestinian territories, said the strikes were not an isolated incident. The U.S. says more than 180 humanitarian workers have been killed in the war. Yeah, you got that right. He said, quote, "This is nearly 3 times the death toll recorded in any single conflict in a year," end of quote. 2 other Israeli strikes late Monday killed at least 16 Palestinians, including 8 children in Rafah, where Israel has vowed to expand its ground operation. The city on the Egyptian border is now home to some 1.4 million Palestinians, most of whom have sought refuge from fighting elsewhere. One strike hit a family home, killing 10 people, including 5 children, according to hospital records. Another hit a gathering near a mosque, killing at least 6 people, including 3 children. So Israel is involved in a genocide right now, an active genocide. And here's what the U.S. needs to do right now. Stop sending them money. Stop sending them weapons. No more weapons, no more money, until they say and they figure out that they're not going to bomb civilians anymore. They're not going to bomb aid workers anymore. Once they say they'll never do that again, and they follow it, and I mean follow it, they better follow it right to the letter. One single civilian better not get killed. Until that day happens, stop sending them arms and money. They're more needed here in this country. Sorry. Yeah, Israel has been killing aid workers. They've been killing civilians. They've been killing broadcasters. Yes, they have. There have been members of the media that have been killed in this war. And now they want to expel Al Jazeera out of the country. Let's go ahead and get to our next story here. This is Joseph Fetterman writing for the Associated Press. This is dated April 2nd out of Jerusalem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday vowed to shut down Al Jazeera's operation in Israel, calling it a terror channel that spreads incitement after Parliament passed a law clearing the way for the closure. Netanyahu's pledge escalated Israel's long-running feud against Al Jazeera. It also threatened to heighten tensions with Qatar, which owns the channel, at a time when the Doha government is playing a key role in mediation efforts to halt the war in Gaza. The broadcaster condemned Netanyahu's incitement claim as a dangerous, ludicrous lie. Yeah, you got that right. Al Jazeera said late Monday that it holds Netanyahu responsible for the safety of its staff and offices, that it would continue what it described as its bold and professional coverage, and that it, quote, reserves the right to pursue every legal step, end of quote. Israel has long had a rocky relationship with Al Jazeera, accusing it of bias against Israel. Relations took a major downturn nearly 2 years ago when Al Jazeera correspondent Shireen Abdu Akleh was killed during an Israeli military raid in the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian-American journalist was well known across the Arab world for her critical coverage of Israel, and the channel accused Israel of intentionally killing her. Israel denied the charge, saying she was likely killed by Israeli fire in what appeared to be an accidental shooting. You hear the same thing over and over again. It was an accident. It was an accident. We didn't mean to kill these aid workers. We didn't mean to kill this journalist. Bullshit. It's all lies. Because Netanyahu is Israel's version of Donald Trump. Period. End of story. Oh, let me continue here. Those relations further deteriorated following the outbreak of Israel's war against Hamas on October 7th, when the militant group carried out a cross-border attack in southern Israel that killed 1,200 people and took 250 others hostage. In December, an Israeli strike killed an Al Jazeera cameraman as he reported on the war in southern Gaza. The channel's bureau chief in Gaza, Wael Daoud, was injured in the same attack. The network also blamed Israel for killing Daoud's son in a strike in January. Hamza Daoud was working for Al Jazeera when the strike hit a car in which he was traveling. The army later said that Hamza Daoud was a member of Islamic Jihad, a militant group that joined the October 7th attack with Hamas. Oh, bull. How can you tell when an Israeli government official is lying? Their lips are moving. Wael Daoud's wife, daughter, and another son were killed along with his grandson in another Israeli strike last October. The channel broadcast images of Daoud entering the hospital and giving way to grief as he peered over the body of his dead son. Israel has not said who the target of that strike was. Well, obviously it was them. Al Jazeera is one of the few international media outlets to remain in Gaza throughout the war, broadcasting bloody scenes of airstrikes and overcrowded hospitals and accusing Israel of massacres. Israel accuses Al Jazeera of collaborating with Hamas. Netanyahu said on X, formerly Twitter, quote, Al Jazeera harmed Israel's security, actively participated in the October 7th massacre, and incited against Israeli soldiers. It is time to remove the bullhorn of Hamas from our country. End of quote. The bullhorn of Hamas. No, I've got bull for you right there, buddy. What a load of bullshit. He said he planned on acting immediately under the authorities of the newly passed law. He said, quote, the terror channel Al Jazeera will no longer broadcast from Israel. End of quote. Al Jazeera has been closed or blocked by other Mideast governments, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. Egypt has banned Al Jazeera since 2013. It launched the crackdown after the 2013 military overthrow of an elected but divisive government dominated by the Muslim Brotherhood group. Egypt considers the Brotherhood a terrorist group and accused both Qatar and Al Jazeera of supporting it. In Washington, State Department spokesman Matthew Miller said the U.S. does not always agree with Al Jazeera's coverage but respects its work. He said, quote, we support the independent free press anywhere in the world, and much of what we know about what has happened in Gaza is because of reporters who are there doing their jobs, including reporters from Al Jazeera, end of quote. Israel has in the past threatened to shutter Al Jazeera but never did so. Monday's law did not immediately close the station, but it authorized its officials to do so after consultations and approval from legal and security officials. Any order would be valid only through July 31st or the end of the war in Gaza. Israel's communications minister, Shlomo Kari, said he intended to move forward with the closure. He said Al Jazeera has been acting as a, quote, propaganda arm of Hamas, end of quote, by, quote, encouraging armed struggle against Israel, end of quote. Really? I don't believe it. He added, quote, it is impossible to tolerate a media outlet with press credentials from the government press office and offices in Israel would act from within against us, certainly during wartime, end of quote. His office said the order would seek to block the channel's broadcasts in Israel and prevent it from operating in the country. The order would not apply to the West Bank or Gaza. Al Jazeera's local bureau chief, Walid al-Omari, said late Monday that the station had not heard from Israeli authorities, but he told the Associated Press, quote, but it's clear it's a question of time and they will take the decision within days, end of quote. But punishing the channel could be risky. Qatar has been acting as a chief mediator between Israel and Hamas. It helped broker and sponsor a week-long ceasefire in November and has been hosting weeks of on-and-off talks aimed at brokering another pause in fighting. By targeting Al Jazeera, Israel could be trying to push Qatar to put additional pressure on Hamas to make concessions. Netanyahu has in the past accused Qatar of not doing enough, but it also risks alienating Qatar, a wealthy, energy-rich Gulf state that is one of the few countries with influence over Hamas. Israel has come under heavy criticism from press freedom groups during the war. The Committee to Protect Journalists says 90 Palestinian journalists have been killed in the war, in addition to 2 Israeli journalists. Israel has also barred international journalists from entering Gaza independently to cover the war. The Army has allowed small groups of journalists to enter Gaza on brief, highly controlled visits under military escort. Hagar Schechter, an attorney with the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, said the law violates, quote, the right for free speech, freedom of the press, freedom of occupation, and undermines separation of powers, end of quote. She added that the group plans to file a petition with Israel's Supreme Court against the law. Oren Persico, a staff writer at the Seventh Eye, an independent media watchdog website in Israel, said the law was a watered-down version of legislation sought by the country's far-right national security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir due to pushback from legal experts. The closure needs an expert opinion from a top security official deeming the network harming Israel's security. The order would then need cabinet or parliamentary approval and further approval from the courts. Persico said most worrying was that other media, including Israeli outlets, could also be in the line of fire. He said, quote, what's important here isn't Al Jazeera, it's about the authority that the government has to shut down media. It's a slippery slope, end of quote. I gotta agree with him there. Israel has become a fascist country. I'll just say it right here on this show. That's it for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and the woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.